Get this filthy laborer out of my lobby before he tracks mud on every inch of my marble." Valerie Kensington didn't look at the man's face. She grabbed the VIP ticket from his calloused hand and tore it in half. The pieces fell into the puddle at his boots. The man, broad-shouldered drywall dust, white across both shoulders, watched the paper sink. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He just looked at her with the kind of stillness that comes from knowing exactly what is about to happen next. 200 parents watched from the lobby. Not one of them said a word. He reached into the breast pocket of his work shirt, slow, deliberate, and
shocking, she just threw away the man who owns her entire life. Let's watch her fall.
The Spring Awards Gala had transformed Oakridge Elite Academy into something spectacular. It looked less like a school. It looked more like the lobby of a five-star hotel, one attempting to swallow a chandelier collection whole. Every surface that could be polished had been polished. Every surface that could be gilded had been gilded. The Italian marble floor gleamed under 11 custom crystal fixtures. Each one hung from the vaulted ceiling like a frozen explosion of diamonds. It had been imported at a considerable cost. The school's fundraising committee had announced that cost with barely concealed glee at 3 consecutive parent meetings. Catering staff in pressed white jackets moved through the growing crowd with practiced invisibility. They offered champagne flutes and miniature canapés. Parents accepted them without making eye contact. The air smelled of hothouse lilies, expensive perfume, and self-congratulation, the kind only a certain tier of private education could generate. It was by every measurable standard exactly the kind of evening she had spent 4 months orchestrating. She stood at the main entrance in a gown of deep sapphire silk. It cost more than most of the service staff earned in 3 months. Her dark hair swept into an architectural arrangement. It had required 2 hours and a specialist who charged by the pin. The emerald pendant at her throat caught the chandelier light. It threw small green sparks across the marble whenever she turned her head. She turned frequently. Turning gave her an unobstructed view of everyone arriving. More importantly, it allowed everyone an unobstructed view of her. She held her champagne flute at precisely the angle she had practiced. She had practiced it in the mirror that afternoon. Her smile had been refined over years of committee meetings and school board presentations. It conveyed warmth at a distance. It communicated absolute authority up close. As chairwoman of the Oakridge Elite Academy Parent-Teacher Association, tonight was her evening, in every meaningful sense. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, intercepting a woman in a tasteful navy blazer near the door. "I'm so glad you could make it. I wanted to personally ensure you received the updated seating assignment. We've moved the Hartwell table to Section B, much better sight lines for the award presentations." She didn't mention that Section B was farther from the stage than Section A. She didn't mention that the reassignment had nothing to do with sight lines. It had everything to do with Claire Hartwell's audacity. At February's PTA meeting, she had suggested that the gala budget might be better directed toward the school's tutoring program for scholarship students. Valerie's smile remained precisely calibrated. She watched the woman process the information, nod politely, move toward Section B without argument. Good. Some lessons only needed to be taught once. She was mid-assessment of a couple near the coat check. The wife's dress was last season. She noted it, filed it. Then she heard the sound. It was small, subtle, rhythmic, the kind that didn't belong. She turned. He was already through the outer doors. The man was tall. She registered that first. It was the first thing about him that was difficult to dismiss. He was broad through the shoulders, the kind of broad that came from actual physical labor rather than a personal trainer. He moved with an unhurried, deliberate gait. It suggested he was accustomed to covering large distances on foot. He had stopped being in a hurry about it sometime in the past decade. He appeared to be in his early 40s. His hair was close-cropped and natural. His jaw looked like it had been set against difficult weather on a regular basis. His skin was a deep, warm brown. His eyes, when they swept briefly across the lobby, were a particular shade of dark, the kind that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. He was also, without any question, the most inappropriately dressed person who had ever set foot inside the Oakridge Elite Academy spring gala. The denim work shirt had started its life as a reasonable garment. That life was some time ago. Its current existence was defined by a constellation of wear, a small burn mark near the right cuff, a tear along the left shoulder seam repaired with thread that was close to but not quite the right color. Most conspicuously, a generous coating of fine white dust coated both shoulders and the upper chest. With each step he took, the dust left faint clouds in the air. His work trousers were the heavy canvas variety, also dusted. His boots, this was the detail that made Valerie's jaw tighten, were construction-grade, steel-toed and heavy. They had seen real work. They had clearly spent the day in close contact with a building site, possibly the previous several days too. They were not merely dirty. They were comprehensively architecturally dirty. They carried a detailed geological record along their soles. Mud aggregate and what appeared to be fresh concrete. Each footfall pressed a faint impression into the gleaming marble. The evening's polishing team had spent 6 hours perfecting it. He was holding a ticket. He was also holding the hand of a small girl. She was approximately 10 years old. She wore a pink dress, perfectly pressed, entirely out of place given her companion. She was looking up at the chandelier display. Her expression was one of complete and uncomplicated wonder. Valerie was moving before she had consciously decided to move. "Excuse me." Her voice carried the full weight of 4 years as PTA chairwoman, 2 years on the school board, and a lifetime of practice at making the phrase sound like a door closing. She positioned herself directly in the man's path. He stopped. He looked at her. His expression was immediately inexplicably unsettling. Not hostile, not embarrassed. Not the defensive rounding of shoulders she had learned to expect from people sensing they were about to be corrected. He simply looked at her, present, patient, as though he had all the time in the world, as though he had already decided how this was going to go. "This is a private event," Valerie said. She kept her eyes on the white dust on his shirt rather than his face. It was a technique she had developed over years. A way of communicating the precise nature of a social verdict. Ticketed entry only, formal attire required. "I have a ticket," he said. His voice was quieter than she expected, low and unhurried with a faint roughness to it, the kind that came from spending years giving instructions in noisy environments. He held it out. Valerie looked at the ticket. It was a VIP credential, gold-bordered, bearing the school's crest, the same tier as her own. She looked back at the dust on his shirt. "I don't know how you obtained that," she said, "but I can assure you that whoever provided it made an error. This event requires my dad." The small girl tugged his hand. He glanced down at her briefly. Something moved across his face, too fast and too private for Valerie to catalog. He looked back up. "Maya has an award tonight," he said simply. "Science competition. I came from a job site. I didn't have time to go home." "That," Valerie said, "is not my problem, and it is certainly not the Academy's problem." She reached out and took the ticket from his hand. Her certainty was brisk, absolute. The certainty of someone who had never once been told no by anyone they considered worth listening to. "What is my problem is that you are tracking construction debris across a $40,000 marble installation and making my guests uncomfortable." She raised her voice just slightly, not to a shout, never to a shout, but to the precise volume that ensured the nearest parents could hear her clearly. "Security, please. We have an unauthorized individual at the entrance." "I'm authorized," he said, still quiet, still patient. "That ticket is now mine." She tore it, clean and deliberate. 2 halves. She let them fall from her fingers. They drifted down into the thin puddle of rainwater his boots had tracked across the threshold. The gold-bordered pieces darkened as they absorbed the water. The school crest split apart neatly along the fold. "And I'm asking you to leave before I have you removed. I won't have the standard of this event compromised by someone who can't manage to observe basic Valerie." Marcus, one of the 2 security personnel stationed at the entrance, had arrived at her shoulder. He was already guiding the man toward the outer doors. His efficiency was practiced apologetic. He knew better than to argue with the PTA chairwoman during a gala she had organized. He knew she would be discussing it for months afterward. The man didn't resist. He moved back towards the doors. His steadiness somehow made the being escorted out feel less like an ejection, more like a decision he had made himself. His large hands still wrapped around the small girl's. She had stopped looking at the chandeliers. She was now watching her father's face. Her expression was trying very hard not to be what it was. Valerie straightened her emerald pendant. She turned back to her lobby. She didn't see him stop just outside the glass doors. She didn't see him lower himself to one knee in the rain to speak to his daughter. She didn't see the child nod. She didn't see the small smile he gave her before he stood again. Maya was guided inside by Marcus with a murmured explanation that she could wait with the faculty near the stage. She didn't see the man stand back upright in the cold rain. She didn't see him reach into the inside pocket of the dusty denim shirt. She didn't see him remove a phone, not a consumer device, something heavier, matte black, with a reinforced casing and an antenna configuration that suggested it was designed to function in places where cell towers were a theoretical concept. She didn't see him compose the message, 4 words. She didn't see him send it. She had already moved on. She greeted the Alderton Price family. She complimented Mrs. Alderton Price on her pearls. She directed the conversation toward the evening's agenda, which was going to be, she was certain, the most successful event in the Academy's recent history. Behind the glass doors in the rain, Jeremiah Cross stood still and waited. The 4 words he had sent were not a plea, not a complaint, not a message to a lawyer, not an alert to a publicist. They were an instruction delivered to a single recipient who had been with him for 11 years. That recipient had learned over those 11 years that when Jeremiah Cross sent 4 words at 9:17 on a Tuesday evening from a secured satellite device, one thing was clear. The correct response was not to ask questions. The correct response was to act. The message read, "Hold the Kensington contract." He put the phone back in his inside pocket. He stood in the rain with his hands at his sides. The water was coming down at the particular angle that made umbrellas partially useless. It found the gap between collar and neck. It ran in thin, cold lines down the back of his shirt. He didn't move to shelter. There was a covered portico 12 feet to his left, but standing under it would have taken him out of sight line. Out of sight line of the lobby's interior. He was not ready to lose sight line of the lobby's interior. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see the warm, amber interior of the gala. The chandelier light softened by the water running down the pane. The moving shapes of formally dressed guests reduced to impressions. The whole scene acquiring the quality of something behind museum glass. He found Maya near the stage. She was sitting in a chair that was slightly too large for her. Her pink dress was arranged carefully around her knees. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was not crying. She was doing the thing she always did when she was upset, when she had decided not to show it. She was very, very still, concentrated, controlled, in the way of a child who has learned that stillness is a form of control. When other forms are unavailable, she had learned that from him. I was not sure, standing in the rain watching her practice it, whether he was proud of that or sorry about it. He pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass. He kept them there, then he let them drop. 34 years ago, Jeremiah Cross had been 9 years old. He had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Baltimore with his mother, his grandmother, and a persistent leak in the kitchen ceiling that his landlord had been promising to fix since the previous winter. The apartment building was owned by a development company. Its regional manager had visited once. He walked through the lobby with his hands in his pockets. He left without speaking to anyone. Jeremiah had watched him from the stairwell. He watched the way the man's eyes moved across the water-stained walls, across the broken mailboxes, across the children sitting on the steps. The particular quality of not seeing, its own kind of statement. The man had driven away in a car that cost more than the building's annual maintenance budget. Jeremiah had stood at the stairwell window and watched the car until it turned the corner. He had thought with the uncomplicated clarity that children sometimes achieve before the world teaches them the complexity of impossible things. I want to understand how that works. Not the car, the building. I was 14 when he started working summers for a local contractor named Dennis Okafor. Dennis's operation consisted of himself, 2 cousins, and a van with a cracked windshield. More work than he could realistically complete without additional hands. Jeremiah had shown up because his mother knew Dennis from church. He had stayed because Dennis was the first person who had ever handed him a tool and stood back, who had waited to see what he would do with it rather than doing it himself while Jeremiah watched. By 16, he could read a blueprint. By 18, he had his own set, rough and imprecise by the standards he would later hold himself to, but sound, but structurally sound, which was the only standard Dennis had taught him to care about first. Everything else is decoration, Dennis used to say, tapping the load-bearing calculations on whatever plan they were reviewing. This is the part that decides whether people get to go home. He had gone to college on a partial scholarship and a full-time construction job. He worked it around his class schedule with an organizational discipline that left him approximately 5 hours of sleep on a good night. He graduated with a degree in structural engineering and $37,000 in debt. He went directly back to work because the theory was useful, but the debt was immediate. He spent the next 6 years building literally and financially. His focus was absolute. The people who knew him during that period would later describe it variously as impressive, alarming, and somewhat inhuman. He bought his first property at 26, his second at 27. He incorporated cross holdings at 29. The portfolio included 4 commercial properties, 2 residential developments, and a reputation in 3 cities, delivering on schedule and on budget. In the construction industry, that was the closest thing to a superpower. He was 42 now. Cross Holdings had projects in 17 states. The portfolio valuation that his CFO had presented at last quarter's board meeting had contained a number with 9 digits before the decimal point. Jeremiah had looked at it for a moment. Then he turned to the next page. The number was not the point. The number was a consequence. The point had never changed from the boy watching from the stairwell. It was the buildings themselves, what they were made of, whether they would stand, whether the people inside them would be safe. Which was why at 6:45 that evening he had been standing on the 14th floor of a mixed-use tower under construction in the financial district 40 miles from here. He had been reviewing a structural discrepancy in the eastern curtain wall framing. With the site foreman, he wore the clothes he was currently standing in the rain in. The helicopter had been waiting on the roof. He had been supposed to leave at 5. The discrepancy had required him to stay until 6:30. It was the kind of thing that needed to be resolved by someone who understood what it meant. He had taken photographs, issued corrections, signed off on the revised specification. Then he had climbed to the roof. He had told the pilot to push the machine as fast as physics would responsibly allow. He had been 11 minutes late to the lobby. In his briefcase, currently sitting in the back of the black work truck parked in the Academy's guest lot, was a document that the school's board of trustees had been awaiting for 4 months. It was a funding agreement, $50 million, allocated in 3 tranches, designated for the construction of the Oakridge Academy Center for Biological and Environmental Sciences. A new wing. A new wing. A proper one built to a specification that Jeremiah had personally reviewed and revised 3 times because his daughter had told him that the science lab currently smelled like the 1970s and had microscopes that required optimism to operate. He had assigned his best architectural team to the design. Quietly, without announcement, he had ensured that the construction contract was structured to employ a significant percentage of workers from the surrounding community, including the 2 zip codes closest to the school, the ones that appeared in 0% of the Academy's current parent demographic. The agreement bore his signature on page 47. It did not yet bear the school's countersignature. His announcement was supposed to happen tonight. He was the anonymous benefactor the school had been referring to for months as a generous friend of the Academy. It was supposed to happen at this gala from that stage in front of every person currently holding a champagne flute in that warm, glittering lobby. Richard Kensington, Valerie's husband, was in that lobby right now. Jeremiah knew this because Richard Kensington's company had submitted the strongest bid for the excavation and foundation subcontract on the new science wing, genuine, competitive, evaluated on its merits by Jeremiah's procurement team, without any knowledge of who Richard was married to. The contract was worth $4.3 million. The letter of intent was in his briefcase beside the funding agreement ready to be countersigned. Hold the Kensington contract. The the rain came down. Inside, through the distorting glass, he could see the lobby filling. The crowd was growing. The gala was approaching its formal commencement. The chandelier light moved across those faces. They had no idea. The man standing outside in the wet dark was the reason their children's school was about to get a $50 million future. He could see Valerie moving through her crowd like a ship in favorable waters, champagne in hand, performing her satisfaction for anyone who would witness it. He watched her. He did not move. He had built load-bearing structures in 17 states. He understood with the patience of someone who had learned engineering from the ground up what mattered most. The most important thing about a foundation was what you chose to put on top of it. He could wait. The rain had settled into the kind of steady, determined fall that suggested it had made a commitment for the evening and intended to honor it. No lightning, no gusts, no cinematic violence. It was simply cold, consistent, and thorough. The variety that found every inadequacy in a person's clothing within minutes, then continued its work long after the point had been made. Jeremiah's shirt was soaked through across the shoulders. The denim had darkened, from its working gray to something closer to charcoal. The white drywall dust that had coated it dissolved into pale streaks running down his chest and forearms. His boots had stopped making the sharp percussive sound they made on hard interior surfaces. They had settled into the softer, heavier compression of wet leather on wet stone, patient and inevitable. He had not moved from his position outside the main entrance. He was aware, a choice that a certain kind of person would find difficult to understand. He had a phone, one that could summon a car in 4 minutes. I had within reasonable driving distance 2 properties he owned outright. Either of them contained dry clothing, hot water, and shelter from the specific patient misery of standing in November rain in work clothes. He had options that the vast majority of people standing in cold rain did not have. He was exercising precisely none of them, but Maya was inside. He could see her from here. She had been moved from the oversized chair near the stage to a seat at the end of the front row. A young female teacher, her homeroom instructor, had positioned herself nearby, with the careful proximity of someone who understood that a child sitting alone at a formal event needed company without being made to feel managed. Maya was sitting upright. Her hands were still folded. She was still doing the stillness. But every 45 seconds or so, he had been counting without entirely meaning to, she turned her head toward the lobby entrance. Not anxiously, not dramatically, just checking. The quiet, habitual monitoring of a child who had learned that her father's word was reliable, but that the world between his word and his arrival could be complicated. Each time she turned and found the entrance empty, she turned back to the stage. She composed her expression quickly, carefully, into something neutral. He pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass at approximately the height of her shoulder. He kept them there. Inside, Valerie Kensington had reached the 3rd act of her evening. It was the part where 4 months of organizational labor began to pay its most visible dividends. She could allow herself the satisfaction of a job genuinely, comprehensively well done. She had earned it. The gala was running 12 minutes ahead of schedule. The catering had been executed without a single visible error. The floral arrangements, white orchids and deep green foliage, her specification, her vendor, her negotiated price point were receiving exactly the quality of ambient admiration she had designed them to receive. 3 parents had already told her it was the most beautiful spring awards evening in recent memory. She had accepted each compliment with the gracious modesty of someone who had been expecting it, and she had been expecting it. She moved through the lobby with the practiced fluency of a person entirely at home in a room she had built, pausing to confirm seating arrangements, redirect a confused caterer, exchange the right number of words with the right people in the right sequence. This was the skill she had cultivated over 2 decades. 2 decades of social architecture. The ability to read a room's social topology as clearly as a floor plan, to move through it along the most efficient path. She knew who needed to be seen talking to whom. She knew which conversations required her presence. She knew which needed only her brief acknowledgement before she moved on. She knew with the instinctive spatial awareness of someone who had been doing this since college exactly where she was in the room at all times. relative to everyone else in it. The anonymous benefactor will be making his announcement from the main stage at 8:45, she told a cluster of board-adjacent parents near the champagne station, pitching her voice at the precise volume of a confidence being generously shared. I can't say more than that, obviously, but I will say, she paused, let the pause do its work, that the number involved is going to change the conversation about what Oakridge is capable of for a very long time. She smiled into the appropriate beat of impressed murmuring. Richard's company has been quietly involved in the preliminary planning, actually. It's been a rather exciting few months. This was true in the technical sense that Richard's company had submitted a bid that was under evaluation. The implication she allowed her audience to draw that Richard's relationship with the anonymous benefactor was one of established partnership rather than competitive procurement was something she had decided some weeks ago to permit. It cost nothing. It positioned Richard favorably. And if the contract came through as she was confident it would, the implication would simply become retroactively accurate. True in the most efficient way, the most efficient kind of truth. She accepted a fresh champagne flute from a passing server. She turned to survey her lobby. Her gaze moved across the glass doors at the entrance without stopping the way a gaze moves across any surface it has already categorized and set aside. She registered the dark shape of the man standing outside, the same portion of attention she gave to the potted topiary flanking the entrance. Present, noted, irrelevant. The security team had handled it. The situation was resolved. The lobby was clean. What she did not do, what it did not occur to her to do, was look at his face. Simply look at it. If she had, she might have noticed something worth paying attention to. Something important. Not anger. Anger was readable, manageable, something you could respond to or dismiss. What was on Jeremiah Cross's face as he stood in the rain and watched her through the glass was something quieter and considerably more specific. It was the expression of a man running precise calculations, a structural assessment, the methodical evaluation of load and stress, the particular points at which a given architecture, however impressive it appeared from the outside, would fail. He had his phone out again. Not the satellite device this time, his personal phone, a standard model he kept specifically because it looked like something a working site foreman might carry, not the chairman of a 9-figure holding company. He held it at his side, angled slightly upward toward the glass. He was recording, not covertly. He wasn't hiding the phone or angling it away from anyone's sightline. He simply held it with the stillness of a man who had learned something important. The most invisible thing in any room is something that looks like it belongs in the hand holding it. Through the rain-streaked glass, the phone's lens captured the lobby's interior in the particular unflattering honesty of glass-filtered light. Valerie at the champagne station, champagne flute raised, performing her confidence for her audience. Valerie intercepting a parent near the coat check and redirecting them with the smooth efficiency of a toll booth operator. Valerie gesturing toward the stage with the proprietary ease of someone indicating a room they consider fundamentally theirs. He had been recording for 11 minutes. He stopped when he saw the change on the stage. Dr. Alistair Pemberton had appeared at the side of the stage. 61 years old, 22 years at Oakridge, a man whose fundamental decency Jeremiah had assessed across 4 months of anonymous correspondence and 2 in-person meetings conducted under the cover of architectural consultation. He was in conversation with the evening's program coordinator. Even through the distortion of the wet glass, Jeremiah could read the posture. Pemberton was checking his watch. He was looking toward the lobby entrance. I was doing the quiet internal arithmetic of a man who has an 8:45 program note that requires a specific person to be present. At 8:32, that specific person was not yet visible. Jeremiah watched him pull out his own phone and look at it, then look toward the entrance again, then back at his phone. On the stage behind Pemberton, arranged on a table draped in Oakridge's colors, were the awards for the evening's student honorees. Jeremiah could see them from here. Engraved plaques, certificates, a small trophy for the science competition that Maya had described to him in exhaustive and entirely unself-conscious detail over dinner 2 weeks ago. She had explained the judging criteria, the competitors, and the specific model of the water filtration prototype she had built with the confident precision of someone who understood exactly how good their work was. who felt no particular need to be modest about it. She had told him at the end of that dinner that she wanted him in the front row. Not to the side, Dad. Front row, so I can see you when they call my name. He looked at her now through the glass and the rain and the chandelier warm distance between them. She had turned toward the entrance again, found it empty again, turned back. He put the phone back in his pocket. Dr. Pemberton had made a decision. Jeremiah could see it happen, the small squaring of the older man's shoulders, the resolution in it, the slight lift of the chin that preceded a public commitment. The decision made. Pemberton stepped up to the podium at the center of the stage. He leaned into the microphone. He spoke. The lobby's ambient noise dropped by several degrees.
Unbelievable cruelty. She actually humiliated a loving father, trying to see his daughter, just because of some dust on his boots. If it were me, I would have smashed that glass door and dragged her across the lobby immediately. Imagine working your whole life to build an empire, only to have some arrogant PTA bully treat you like trash. Her trap is perfectly set.
He rolled his shoulders once the way he did on a job site before beginning work that required sustained and careful attention. He reached into his pocket and removed the satellite phone. He sent a second message, 2 words this time, to a different recipient. Then he put both phones away. He looked at the glass doors directly in front of him. He waited for what he had known for the past 47 minutes was coming.
Shocking! She just threw away the man who owns her entire life. Let's watch her fall.
Unbelievable cruelty. She actually humiliated a loving father trying to see his daughter just because of some dust on his boots. If it were me, I would have smashed that glass door and dragged her across the lobby immediately. Imagine working your whole life to build an empire only to have some arrogant PTA bully treat you like trash. Her trap is perfectly set. Dr. Alistair Pemberton had spent 22 years learning how to read a room from a podium. It was a specific and undervalued skill. Most people who had never stood at a podium failed to appreciate it. It was not simply a matter of projecting your voice, not simply a matter of watching faces. It was the ability to hold a prepared text in your peripheral vision while simultaneously processing the live unscripted data of several hundred people's reactions. The micro shifts in posture, the quality of silence, the atmospheric change that moved through a crowd when something was about to happen that the crowd did not yet know about. 22 years had made him very good at it. It had also given him an acute sensitivity to the specific texture of a silence that meant something was wrong. The silence that fell over the Oakridge Elite Academy spring gala at 8:43 was that kind of silence. He had begun his introduction with the careful, practiced warmth of someone who had rehearsed it enough times to deliver it naturally. He had spoken about the Academy's history, its commitment to excellence, the particular quality of community that distinguished Oakridge from institutions that offered merely education rather than formation. He had spoken about the extraordinary generosity of anonymous benefactors, about the transformative potential of private investment in young minds. He had watched the audience receive all of this with satisfied attentiveness, the attentiveness of people who had paid significant money to have their existing beliefs confirmed, who were finding the confirmation entirely adequate. Then he had looked down at the front row, the VIP chair, the one he had personally designated, the one marked with the small gold-bordered card that read, Mr. J. Cross, Distinguished Guest, was empty. He looked up at the lobby entrance. He checked his watch. He had looked back at the entrance. He took a breath. He maintained his expression. He had continued speaking because 22 years had also taught him that a room could feel a speaker's hesitation before the speaker was consciously aware of it. He was not going to give this room that particular thing to feel. Not that. He had extended his remarks by approximately 90 seconds. A bridge, a professional grace note. His eyes moved with increasing urgency toward the lobby entrance and the glass doors beyond it. It was on the second sweep that he saw him. The man was standing directly outside the glass doors in the rain. Even through the distance and the distortion of the wet panes, Pemberton recognized him immediately, without question. He had spent 4 months corresponding with him, 2 hours meeting with him in person, considerable private time reviewing the architectural renderings for the proposed science wing. He recognized the height. He recognized the stillness. He recognized the particular quality of patience that Jeremiah Cross carried, the way other men carried a briefcase, a working tool, deployed deliberately, without apology. What he did not immediately understand was why Jeremiah Cross was standing outside in the rain, instead of inside in the front row. He understood it 4 seconds later. His gaze moved left and found Valerie Kensington standing at the edge of the parquet with a champagne flute and an expression of pleasant anticipatory attention. Something connected in his memory. A brief, troubling report from Marcus at security, delivered in the 40 minutes before the program began. He had been too occupied to fully process it. A man at the entrance, Mrs. Kensington, handled it. No incident. No incident. Pemberton closed his remarks folder. "Please excuse me for just one moment," he said into the microphone with a smoothness that he was privately rather proud of. He stepped back from the podium. He came through the lobby at a pace that was not quite a run. He was 61 years old. Running communicated panic. Panic communicated loss of control. Loss of control was the one thing a headmaster could not afford, not in front of his institution's most significant donors. But he covered ground with a purposefulness that caused people to step aside, without being asked. He passed the champagne station. He passed the orchid arrangements. He pushed through the glass doors into the rain. Jeremiah Cross turned to look at him with an expression that contained no particular surprise. "Mr. Cross." Pemberton was breathing harder than he wanted to be. The rain immediately began its work on his dinner jacket. I don't have adequate words for what I am right now. I was just told I only just understood what happened at the entrance, and I want you to know, Dr. Pemberton." Jeremiah's voice was the same as it had been in their meetings, measured, unhurried, carrying that quality of compression like a great deal of force moving through a very controlled opening. "How much time is left in your program?" Pemberton blinked. The student awards are next. Maya's category is first." Something moved briefly across Jeremiah's face. "Then let's not waste it." Pemberton did not require further instruction. He turned. He pushed both glass doors open to their full width, a gesture that was, he was aware, somewhat theatrical, but that the moment seemed to require. He stepped aside. The sound arrived before the man did. It was the sound of wet work boots on Italian marble. Loud, flat, definitive in the particular way that sounds become loud when a room has gone very quiet around them. Each footfall landed with a flat, definitive weight, not aggressive, not performative, simply the sound of a large man in heavy boots walking at his natural pace across a surface that had been designed to announce arrivals and was doing its job with complete impartiality. The sound moved ahead of him through the lobby like a frequency. People turned toward it the way people turn toward unexpected sounds in quiet spaces, involuntarily, all at once. He was soaked. His shirt was dark with rain across the shoulders and chest. The drywall dust had dissolved into pale, faint, persistent ghost streaks across the denim. His boots left wet impressions on the marble with each step, not the delicate suggestion of moisture. The full, frank declaration of a man who had been standing outside in sustained rain for the better part of an hour and was now inside, and the floor was going to reflect that. His hair was flattened. His jaw carried the particular set of someone who had made a decision and was now simply executing it. He looked at no one except the stage. The crowd's response was not a single thing. It was layered, happening in sequence as comprehension moved through different parts of the room at different speeds. The catering staff nearest the entrance registered the entrance first and stepped back. The parents in the rear rows turned before the parents in the front rows. The board members seated along the side wall had the particular reaction of people who had seen his name on documents and were now for the first time attaching it to a physical reality that the documents had not prepared them for. Valerie Kensington was still holding her champagne flute when she turned. She turned because everyone around her turned and because the sound of his boots was impossible to locate and ignore simultaneously, and because some animal awareness older than her social architecture told her that the quality of the room's attention had changed in a way she needed to understand. She turned. She saw him. For a period of approximately 3 seconds, she did not process what she was seeing because what she was seeing did not fit the category she had filed it in 47 minutes ago. The category was resolved. The category was handled. The category was the man in the dusty shirt who had been removed from her lobby and was no longer a variable she needed to account for. The category was wrong. The champagne flute left her hand in the manner of things that are no longer being held, rather than things that are actively dropped. A gradual unclenching of fingers that had forgotten they were holding something. The glass tipped. It caught the chandelier light in one last prismatic flare, then it hit the marble. Shatter. Thoroughly. Without ambiguity. The sound of it was swallowed by the larger silence around it. Several people near her stepped back from the spray of fragments. She did not move. She stood in the wreckage with her hand still curved in the shape of the stem staring. Jeremiah Cross walked past her without looking at her. He walked the length of the lobby and up the 3 steps to the stage and across the stage to the podium. Dr. Pemberton, who had re-entered through a side door, was standing at the edge of the stage. He made a small gesture toward the microphone, equal parts invitation and apology. Jeremiah adjusted the microphone to his height. It required moving it upward. The room registered that. He looked out at the assembled faces of Oakridge Elite Academy's most significant parents, donors, and stakeholders. Maya was in the front row. She had turned in her seat when the boot started. She was looking at him now. Her expression had shed all of its careful composure in a single instant. Her face was open and unguarded. Her eyes were bright. One hand was pressed flat against her sternum in the unconscious way of children whose hearts are too full for their bodies to contain quietly. He looked at her for a moment before he looked at anyone else. Long enough for it to be deliberate. Long enough for the room to see him do it. Long enough for it to matter. Then he leaned into the microphone and said in a voice that was quiet enough that the room had to be completely still to hear it, and was, "I apologize for being late. I came from a job site." He reached into the inside pocket of his rain-soaked denim shirt. He removed a folded document. He placed it on the podium. He smoothed it flat with one large, calloused hand. The room watched him do all of this without making a sound. "My name is Jeremiah Cross," he said, "and I believe we have some business to take care of." The room held its breath in the particular way of rooms that have just understood something important and are waiting to find out what it means. Jeremiah did not rush to fill the silence. He had learned over 2 decades of boardrooms and site meetings and negotiations conducted across tables where the other party held what they believed to be structural advantages that silence was not empty. Silence was a material. It had weight, tensile strength, and load-bearing capacity. Like any material, its properties depended entirely on who was shaping it, and to what purpose. He let it work for 11 seconds. He counted them, without any outward sign of counting. Then he reached into the other inside pocket of his rain-soaked shirt. He removed his phone, not the satellite device, his personal phone, the one that had been recording through the glass for 11 minutes. He connected it to the podium's auxiliary input with a cable that Dr. Pemberton had left coiled beside the microphone stand. With the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent 20 minutes before this moment ensuring that specific cable was accessible and functional. The connection registered on the hall's audio system with a small, clean tone. Jeremiah looked out at the room once briefly with the expression of a structural engineer confirming that a foundation is exactly where he left it. He pressed play. Valerie Kensington's voice filled the Oakridge Elite Academy auditorium with a clarity and fidelity that the room's acoustics designed for musical performances and formal addresses delivered with complete democratic impartiality. "I don't know how you obtained that, but I can assure you that whoever provided it made an error. The sound quality was imperfect, glass-filtered, rain-ambient, with the slight compression of a phone microphone working at range. But the voice was unmistakable. The diction was unmistakable. The tone was unmistakable, that particular register of absolute social certainty of a woman speaking to someone she had already categorized as beneath the effort of genuine engagement. This is an elite academic assembly, not a day laborer's shelter." Someone in the 3rd row made a sound that was quickly suppressed. The room's silence had changed quality. It was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of people who are hearing something that is rearranging their understanding of the last hour. People not yet sure how to wear the rearrangement. "What is my problem is that you are tracking construction debris across a $40,000 marble installation and making my guests uncomfortable." Jeremiah watched the room as the room listened. He did not watch Valerie. Not yet. He watched the board members along the side wall whose expressions were moving through a sequence: confusion, recognition, comprehension, and then the particular stillness of institutional people calculating consequences. He watched the parents in the middle rows where comprehension was arriving faster because their investment was personal rather than fiduciary. He watched Maya in the front row, who was listening with her hands folded in her lap and her chin slightly raised with the expression of a child who has learned to be very still and is now watching that particular skill turn to a different purpose. Security, please. We have an unauthorized individual at the entrance. The recording ended with the clean sound of tearing paper, 2 precise tears, the VIP credential bisected and released, then the ambient rain, then silence. Jeremiah reached over and disconnected the phone. He placed it in his shirt pocket. He looked at the room. "I want to be precise about what you just heard," he said, "because precision matters to me. That recording was made through the exterior glass of this building, which is glass I specified in a renovation I funded 3 years ago. The marble floor you heard referenced," he paused, selecting the accurate word, "is a Calicotta Borghini installation that cost $62,000, not $40,000, and which I paid for as part of the same renovation because the previous floor had a structural drainage issue that the Academy's maintenance budget couldn't address. I'm not raising these details to impress anyone. I'm raising them because I think accuracy is owed to everyone in this room, including the people whose understanding of this evening has just changed considerably." He looked for the first time since approaching the podium directly at Valerie Kensington. She was standing where she had been standing, where she had been when the champagne flute left her hand. Someone had quietly cleared the broken glass from around her feet. A small, considered act. She stood now in a clean radius, less like consideration, more like quarantine. Her color was wrong. The careful warmth of her makeup sat on top of something that had gone gray and cold underneath it. Her hands were at her sides. They were completely still. Jeremiah recognized the stillness. He had seen it on his daughter's face 40 minutes ago. He had understood then what it cost. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt with great clarity the thing he had been feeling for the past hour. Cold, specific, not hot, not performative, not the kind that required an audience to sustain itself. The kind that had a structural function. The kind that knew exactly what it was for. "Richard Kensington," he said. The name moved through the room and found its target. Richard Kensington was seated at a table in Section A, Valerie's best section, Valerie's sightlines. He stood with the reflexive obedience of a man who had heard his name called in a significant room. He had not yet determined whether the significance was good or bad. He was shorter than his wife by 2 inches. He had the particular physical presentation of a man who had spent his adult life adjacent to money and construction. The handshake and the blazer to prove it, but not quite the hands. He looked at Jeremiah with an expression that was trying to be neutral and was not succeeding. "Your company submitted a bid for the excavation and foundation subcontract on the Oakridge Center for Biological and Environmental Sciences," Jeremiah said. $4.3 million. The bid was evaluated by my procurement team on its merits without any knowledge of your family connection to this institution. The evaluation was positive. A letter of intent was prepared. Richard Kensington's expression had moved past trying to be neutral. It had arrived somewhere that was almost relief. The expression of a man hearing against recent probability that something is going to be all right, that the worst might not happen. Jeremiah reached into his briefcase, which Dr. Pemberton had placed on the podium with the unobtrusive competence that Jeremiah had come to appreciate about the man. He removed 2 documents. He placed them on the podium surface, side by side. He looked at them for a moment, the particular attention of someone confirming the identity of a thing before acting on it. Then he picked up the letter of intent. He tore it in half. The sound the paper made was clean, sharp, and final, amplified by the microphone into something that traveled to every corner of the room. He tore it again. Quarters. He set the pieces on the podium surface where they sat in a small, neat pile. The room looked at them the way rooms look at things that have just become symbols. Cross Holdings is withdrawing from all contractual consideration of Kensington Construction, he said. Not because of the bid. The bid was sound. "I'm withdrawing because I have a policy. It's not written anywhere, it's not in any of our corporate documentation, but it is absolute that the culture a company's leadership demonstrates in their personal conduct is the culture that company brings to a job site. I've been in this industry for 23 years, he continued. He looked at the room. I've learned that the people who treat service workers like problems to be managed, who measure human dignity by the cleanliness of a person's clothing, who will humiliate a man in front of his child because his boots have job site mud on them." He paused, and the pause had weight. "Those people make decisions on my projects that I can't afford, not financially. I can't afford them as a matter of principle, and I don't." Richard Kensington had sat down. He had done it without deciding to. His body had made the decision independently, the way bodies do when the architecture of an expected future collapses suddenly and completely. He sat with his hands flat on the table in front of him. He was looking at his wife. The look was not kind. It was not anything close to kind. Valerie was not looking back. Valerie was looking at the floor at the middle distance at something that was not in this room. She had the expression of someone doing rapid structural assessment of a building they are standing inside, finding the calculations very bad. "To the board of Oakridge Academy," Jeremiah continued, turning slightly toward the side wall where the board members sat in their institutional stillness. "The funding agreement for the science wing remains in full effect. $50 million, 3 tranches, the terms as discussed. I'm not withdrawing support from this school because of one person's behavior. The students here, including my daughter, did nothing to deserve that. And the staff of this institution, the majority of whom I've observed tonight behaving with considerably more grace than some of its parent volunteers, deserve better. They deserve better than to have their institution's future held hostage to a personal grievance." He looked at Dr. Pemberton, who was standing at the edge of the stage with the expression of a man watching something he has hoped for without quite allowing himself to believe in it. "Dr. Pemberton, I'll countersign the agreement tonight if you have 20 minutes and a pen." Pemberton nodded once with a precision and sincerity that required no elaboration. Jeremiah gathered the torn pieces of the letter of intent from the podium surface. He held them for a moment, then he set them down again, carefully, at the podium's edge. A detail, a record, the kind of thing that should exist. He looked out at the room one final time, at the board members calculating, at the parents recalibrating, at Richard Kensington's hands flat on the table, at Valerie Kensington. She had not moved. She was standing in her clean radius with her gray face and her still hands, beginning to understand. Jeremiah could see the understanding arriving in her. The way you see a crack propagate through a load-bearing wall, slowly at first, then all at once. The building she had believed herself to be standing inside was not the building she had thought it was. He stepped back from the microphone. He walked down off the stage. He crossed the front row. He found the empty VIP chair beside his daughter. He sat down. And Maya Cross, 10-year-old science competition winner, leaned her head against her father's rain-soaked arm and did not say anything at all. She didn't need to. The applause began in the way that genuine applause begins, which is different from the kind that politeness requires, and different again from the kind that social pressure manufactures. It started in one place, a single pair of hands, somewhere in the middle rows, belonging to a man in his 50s whom Jeremiah didn't know and would later learn was a former construction worker himself, now an engineer. He had sat through the recording with his jaw set and his hands in his lap. It spread the way things spread when they are responding to something true, rather than something performed. Not instantly. With a brief moment of permission-seeking, people looking at the people beside them, reading the room's collective verdict before committing to their own. Then the commitment arriving, the sound building. Within 30 seconds, the Oakridge Elite Academy auditorium contained the kind of noise that its acoustics had been designed for, but rarely got to process in its rawest form. Maya lifted her head from her father's arm when the sound started. She looked around at the room with the open, undefended curiosity of a child experiencing something she didn't have a category for yet. Then she looked at her father. Jeremiah Cross, who had not smiled since he had walked through the glass doors, smiled at his daughter. It was the particular smile of a man who has been holding a great deal of weight for a long time, who has just for a specific and circumscribed moment set it down. He was still soaked. The VIP chair's upholstery would remember this evening. He found sitting in it with his daughter's shoulder against his arm and the room's noise washing over them that he did not care about the upholstery at all, not even slightly. The formal business of the evening resumed 20 minutes later after an intermission that Dr. Pemberton called with the diplomatic efficiency of a man who understood that certain emotional atmospheres need time to settle before institutional proceedings can usefully continue. The student awards were presented in order of category. Maya Cross received the Spring Science Innovation Prize for her water filtration prototype. The judge's citation described it as demonstrating in a 10-year-old a grasp of practical environmental engineering, a grasp that several adult professionals in the audience might productively examine. She walked to the stage with the calm, precise confidence of someone who had known this was coming, who had decided to receive it with appropriate dignity. She shook Dr. Pemberton's hand. She accepted the trophy. She looked out at the front row, at her father. The look they exchanged was entirely private and entirely sufficient. Jeremiah countersigned the funding agreement in Dr. Pemberton's office at 9:47 using a pen that the headmaster produced from his desk drawer with the care of a man producing something he had been keeping for an occasion worth the production. The agreement was witnessed by 2 board members who had requested the privilege and whose expressions suggested they intended to describe this evening to their grandchildren. Jeremiah signed with the same unhurried deliberateness he brought to every document that bore his name, not slowly, not dramatically, but with the attention of someone who understood that a signature was a commitment. Commitments were the load-bearing elements of every structure, physical or otherwise. When it was done, Pemberton set the pen down. He looked at him. "I owe you an apology," the headmaster said. "A significant one. What happened tonight at the entrance was handled," Jeremiah said. "Not dismissively, factually. The person responsible for it was not your staff. Your security officer was following instructions from someone who presented herself as having institutional authority. That's a process failure, not a character failure, and process failures are correctable." He looked at the signed agreement on the desk between them. "I'd like to talk about one specific correction if you have another few minutes." Pemberton had another few minutes. The lobby had changed in quality by the time Jeremiah came back through it. The formal proceedings had concluded. The space had relaxed into the post-event register of a crowd that has processed something significant together, now moving through the particular intimacy of shared experience. Quieter, more genuine. The social performance dialed down by an evening's worth of real events, rendering it temporarily unnecessary. Several people approached him as he crossed the marble. He shook hands. He received words that he accepted without ceremony and deflected without coldness. He moved through the room with the same unhurried purposefulness he had brought into it. He was looking for someone specific. He found her near the coat check. She was helping a child not her own locate a misplaced jacket, with the patient, practical efficiency of someone who was accustomed to solving small problems without being asked. She was wearing the uniform of the Academy's facilities staff, the dark utility trousers and collared shirt with the Oakridge crest. She had the particular physical economy of someone who spent their working hours moving between tasks, not between conversations. Her name was Diane Osei. She was 34 years old, a single mother with 2 children enrolled at Oakridge on the institution's scholarship program. She had worked as a member of the facilities team for 6 years, and she had been the only person in the lobby in the 11 minutes between Jeremiah's removal and the commencement of the formal program who had looked at Marcus after the ejection and said something, quietly, with complete composure. She didn't think that was right. Someone should go and check. Marcus, to his credit, had told Pemberton. Pemberton had told Jeremiah during the 9:47 meeting. She looked up when he stopped beside her. She found the child's jacket. She handed it to its owner. The owner took it and ran without acknowledgement in the way of children. She straightened. She looked at him with an expression that was neither intimidated nor performing composure, simply present. "Ms. Osei," Jeremiah said. "Mr. Cross," she said. Her voice was steady with a faint Ghanaian cadence that she hadn't lost in however many years she'd been on this side of the Atlantic. "Your daughter did very well tonight." "She did," he agreed. "I heard you said something on my behalf earlier. Before anyone knew who I was, Diane Osei looked at him for a moment. I said something because it was the right thing to say, she said with the particular clarity of someone for whom this distinction matters and who wants to make sure it has been accurately received. Not because of who you turned out to be. Jeremiah nodded. I know, he said. That's why I'm standing here. He reached into his briefcase and removed a document, not the funding agreement, not the torn pieces of the letter of intent, a third document, one he had drafted 2 days ago in the anticipation of a different kind of evening, one that had required revision this afternoon in the anticipation of the evening it had actually become. He held it out to her. She took it. She read it. She read it again. Her expression did not perform surprise. It did something more interesting. It became very still, the way of someone receiving information that they are taking seriously rather than reacting to. The document was an appointment, chair of the Oakridge Academy Parent and Community Advisory Council, a body that did not yet exist. Jeremiah had spent 40 minutes discussing it with Dr. Pemberton. It was going to replace the existing PTA structure with something that had a broader mandate, a more transparent governance process, and a membership drawn explicitly from the full range of the Academy's community, rather than its most socially dominant constituency. The chair position carried a stipend. The stipend was modest but real, the kind that acknowledged that not everyone could afford to volunteer their expertise. That mattered. The appointment was for 2 years renewable. Diane Osei looked up from the document. She looked at him for a long moment, the expression of someone making a genuine assessment rather than a social performance. I have a facilities shift at 6:30 tomorrow morning, she said. The appointment doesn't affect your employment status, Jeremiah said. Council meetings are scheduled around working hours. Dr. Pemberton has confirmed that. Another moment. My children go here on scholarship, she said, not defensively. Information she was providing because she considered it relevant. I know, Jeremiah said. I read the scholarship program terms this afternoon. They're not affected by this appointment. And for what it's worth, he paused, selecting words with care. I think a person who understands what it costs to have your child at a school like this has information that a governing body needs and that it is not currently getting. Diane Osei looked down at the document one more time. Then she looked up. The assessment in her expression had resolved into something more definite. I'll need to read this properly, she said, and I'll need to think about it. Of course, Jeremiah said, but provisionally, she said, and the steadiness in her voice carried the weight of someone who does not say provisional things carelessly, yes. Valerie Kensington left the Oakridge Elite Academy Spring Gala at 9:53, escorted not forcibly but with the firm directional guidance of 2 security personnel who had received specific updated instructions through the side exit rather than the main lobby. Her PTA credentials were collected at Dr. Pemberton's request by his administrative assistant, who performed the task with the professional neutrality of someone who had been asked to do unpleasant things before and understood that performing them without editorializing was itself a form of decency. The sapphire silk dress, the architectural hair, the emerald pendant catching no one's light in the cold parking lot, none of it had changed. Only the room it was moving through had changed. And rooms Jeremiah Cross had learned at the age of 9 were everything. He had learned it watching a property manager walk through a building he owned but did not care for. They were the difference between shelter and exposure, between a structure that served the people inside it and a structure that served only itself. He found Maya waiting for him near the main entrance, her trophy held in both hands, her pink dress still perfectly pressed. Her face carried the open, uncomplicated contentment of a child who has had a significant evening, now ready to go home and tell someone about it in exhaustive detail. She looked up at him, at his rain-dried shirt still bearing its ghost streaks of dissolved drywall dust, at his boots, the mud now dried to a pale crust on the steel-toed caps. You need new clothes, Dad, she said. I know, he said. I told Mrs. Chen you came from a job site, she said with the matter-of-fact dignity of someone setting a record straight on behalf of someone they consider worth defending. She said that was cool, actually. She said her dad was a welder. Jeremiah Cross looked at his daughter for a moment, at the trophy in her hands, at the evening in her face, at the absolute unqualified certainty with which she had just offered her advocacy. That certainty, his. He felt something that was not reducible to any of the things the evening had also contained. Not the anger, not the calculation, not the cold patience of someone working a structural problem to its conclusion. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked out through the main entrance, across the marble that bore no trace of his boots now, past the orchid arrangements and the dimming chandeliers, past the last of the catering staff beginning their quiet work of returning the room to itself, out into the night. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean. The parking lot held his muddy work truck exactly where he had left it, patient, entirely unimpressed by the building beside it. The building as he walked away from it looked the same as it always had, but its foundation as of tonight was different. And Jeremiah Cross, who had built enough structures to know that foundations were the only part that truly mattered, walked his daughter to the truck. One step at a time. He drove them home through the clean dark. The trophy sat on the seat between them, catching the passing streetlights one by one.
You can feel the sheer panic, freezing her blood, when she realized the dirty laborer she threw out was the billionaire, holding her entire world in his hands. Put yourself in Jeremiah's boots, standing in the freezing rain, swallowing that deep humiliation, just to spring the ultimate trap. Would you have kept your silence to let her dig her own grave? Drop your answer in the comments below. Share this masterpiece of justice with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to make sure you never miss the next story.